Chess has been around for a long time, with known games played almost a millennia ago, and the first recorded game played by modern rules dates back over 500 years. However, most of the oldest chess games are, despite some pretty nice combinations, of dubious quality. A modern master probably plays at a higher level in most blitz games. The first modern chess masterpiece dates back close to 200 years. In a series of 6 matches, the Frenchman Louis de la Bourdonnais defeated Alexander McDonnell. The greatest of the more than 80 known games that they played is the following. My number 3 best chess game from before 1900. McDonnell opens the game here with pawn to e4, and La Bourdonnais is ahead of his time. He plays pawn to c5, the Sicilian defense. Of course, today the Sicilian is extremely standard, but before 1900, I've seen a lot of games, and most began e4, e5. The Sicilian was certainly pretty rare. Here, after c5, we actually see pretty good modern play at the beginning. Knight f3, knight c6, d4, c takes d4, an open Sicilian, knight takes d4, and e5. Now, this is considered to be great today, but for a long time, this kind of weakening of the d5 square was considered not that good. A modern master here would play knight to b5, targeting the weak point on d6, although we do know that black has pretty good counterplay. Instead, McDonnell, not having access to all of our theoretical books on the Sicilian, plays knight captures on c6, which is not the best move in the position. It's by no means losing, but black has a pretty easy equality, and honestly, I'd rather have black's side of the equality after the recapture towards the center that gives black an extra center pawn and some control over the d5 point, which a moment ago was the weakness that white was hoping to exploit. Now, bishop c4, good development, knight f6, attacking the pawn on e4. And here, white has 2 natural moves that are still good for about equality. One is knight c3, and even if black can come out and pin the knight, black doesn't really want to capture on c3 and give up the defender of the dark squares. Again, this is about equal. Also, white can just castle, and in this position, if black captures that pawn on e4, rook e1 puts a lot of pressure on the black position. And again, things are about equal, although I wouldn't want to be so greedy if I were black. I probably would not capture on e4. So after knight f6, bishop g5 is played, and this is a bit inaccurate. A lot of times the outcome is going to be that white is going to have to capture on f6 and give up the bishop pair, which you don't want to do. That does happen in the game. Here, actually, a really strong continuation is queen a5 check, which is going to encourage bishop d2, but then queen b6, and both of these points are soft. So that could have been really, really hard to meet. Instead, after bishop g5, the natural move bishop to e7 is played, developing and unpinning, getting ready to castle. And now queen to e2, again, maybe not the best move, knight c3 more natural. d5, immediately expanding in the center. And this is actually a pretty good move, although I do have to say, I would be reluctant to play this. I'd rather castle and then play this move. But on the other hand, if you castle, you do allow white to develop and play like a knight c3 and put more pieces into position to control the d5 square. So striking out now does work. I think a crazy, crazy computer line here is pawn takes d5, because this leads to some really insane complications. After pawn takes, bishop b5 check, bishop d7. All of this seems kind of natural so far. Knight c3. Now, this is a real kind of tense moment, because this pawn center, if it survives and black consolidates, is a huge pawn center that should basically give black a huge advantage. But white has a lot of development in this position. And of course, there's pressure on d5 right away. The strongest move is d4. And then white can sacrifice a piece with queen takes e5, pawn takes c3, and castles queenside. And this is really unclear. A crazy, crazy line. And the best move for black here is castles, insane. And now bishop takes d7. And here, white is winning a piece, but evidently black is actually close to winning the game because of knight takes d7, queen takes e7, and then queen to a5. And in this position, this is a problem. Note that black never captures here on b2 prematurely, when white will just play king b1 and have a nice safe king and can consolidate an extra piece. Here, black is on the b2 point, black is on the a2 point, black is also on the bishop. And the only way to pocket the piece here is rook takes d7. But in this position, rook a to e8 actually gives black a big advantage because there's no good way for the queen to continue defending the bishop over here. This is just an insane line. There are a number of other variations I haven't touched on in this complicated line, but I'm going to leave it there and just go, wow, that's insane. And it really shows some resilient ideas from black. In the game, after pawn to d5, white went ahead and captured here on f6. I just think this is a major concession. You're giving up the bishop pair for no reason. Bishop takes f6. Black is definitely better now. Center and bishop pair. Bishop to b3, castles, castles, and a5 looking for both bishop to a6, potential ouchie, and pawn here to a4, trapping the bishop. So two potential ouchies in the position. The best move, according to the engine, is actually rook d1 here, which deals with bishop a6 by moving the rook so it's not skewered, and it deals with a4 because now there's bishop c4 because of the pin on the d file. So very clever, resourceful defense there. Instead, white understandably doesn't find this idea and plays pawn takes on d5 so that there's some room for the bishop to run, but this just strengthens the pawn center. Now, black is better here, but actually, by the way, an improvement was to play pawn to a4. Really nice move, an intermediate move, and then after bishop c4, you can play pawn takes d5, and you kind of gain some time to expand the center. If rook d1, you can just support the center right here. Black has the bishop pair, an amazing center, better development. What's not to love? So, backing up, in the game, after pawn takes on d5, we get rook d1, pressure on the center, and the center expands, pawn to d4. Now, in this position, I think white makes a positional error, which is not losing, but it's just the kind of positional error that a modern master just doesn't make. White can play, I think, c3 or knight d2, two of the moves that the engine likes and that seem very natural to me as a human player. And, black is better, but white's playing on. Instead, white plays pawn c4, which positionally just does not make sense to me. You're turning the d pawn into a passed pawn, just adding so much strength to black's center. And you're also blocking in this bishop right here. I have to say, by the way, I don't even know if white is allowed to capture or black is allowed to capture en passant at this point in time in 1834. But of course, you don't want to anyway because you lose your queen on d8. I just don't know if it was in the rules or not. But c4 is just very, very wrong. You do not give your opponent a protected passed d pawn like this in modern chess and make your bishop bad. No one today is going to do that. Queen b6 now, played in the game. Bishop c2, kind of a little trick. Black, of course, is never going to capture here and lose the queen after this discovered attack. So after bishop c2, we see bishop to b7, nice development. Knight to d2, hey, maybe I can put my knight over here in a good square. Black still can't capture on b2, by the way, even though you're attacking this bishop, which is undefended, because white can throw in the move queen d3, threaten mate over here, and then this is defended, so you have the idea of rook b1, skewering the bishop on b7. As a result, white would get out of all the troubles here. So after knight d2, played is rook a e8, which I think is very, very interesting. And this is far-sighted from black. It reminds me of the kind of similar rook development in Zukertort versus Blackburn. And I wonder if Zukertort was thinking of this. It looks very odd to play a rook here because the other rook just has literally no squares to move to. But the point is that black is anticipating getting this pawn moving. This is just a very, very nice idea that pays off handsomely. I think a modern master would probably try to put a rook on d8 and e8, which is strong and natural, but this is good too, and it's very creative and strategically interesting. So knight e4, and also maybe anticipated is bishop d8. The knight kind of had to go to e4. What else are you doing? So if you put a rook on d8, you couldn't have pulled your bishop back here, and everything's ready to roll. Black's pieces are working together perfectly. So c5, attacking the queen. The queen moves over to c6. Of course, do not move the knight now. f3, at least now I can move the knight. And then here, You can already play pawn to f5, but it's not good yet. f5 would be a mistake. White is actually better after queen c4 check, and then knight up here when you're threatening bishop to a4, knight takes, and knight to f7. A lot of possible ouchies right here. So after f3, we see preparation with bishop to e7, rook c1, and now pawn to f5. And this is still maybe a little bit inaccurate because white is getting more counterplay than anticipated after queen c4 check. King h8, and now white has a great resource that I just don't think I would find in a game. That's the move knight d6. And it looks like black can just capture this, but knight d6 is followed up by the excellent bishop to a4, a really, really impressive intermediate move. And the idea is after the queen moves, then you can capture here. You're still on the rook, and your pieces are flooding into the position. And actually, white is better if black moves the queen away. So black needs to go and capture here on c5, and black is a little better still there. But this is a huge resource for white. It goes unfound, and white plays the very natural bishop a4 right away. But then there's the response, queen to h6. This is an exchange sacrifice. But we're going to be able to capture on e4. We have queen e3 check, and our pieces are humming here. So bishop takes e8, pawn takes e4, and c6. Very, very important move. Attacking this bishop right here, and also creating a very strong pass c pawn. Black has a ton of pawns in the middle of the board and is going to have multiple pass pawns, but white does have counterplay and black needs to be precise. Pawn takes on f3 here. And so in this position, it's not good to capture here on b7 because actually it's forced mate. Here you have queen to e3 check. And then after the king moves over, you're able to capture here on g2. And then after king takes g2, I think there's actually probably many ways to win, but the most precise is rook to f2. If the king goes back here, you have a discover check and you're following up with queen checks leading to mate. And if the king goes into the corner, you have check here, and then you're going to follow up with mate. So after pawn takes f3, we get a defensive move, rook c2, holding on to the second rank right here. In this position, black has a win, but it is incredibly precise, a dirty engine move. It's the move bishop to a6, a decoy sacrifice so that after queen takes a6, the black pawns in the center can march down the board, pawn to e4. And evidently black is winning here. Black is down a rook, and this is still hanging over here, but these pawns are too much. This kind of prefaces the eventual conclusion in the game. But black understandably does not find this. Black plays queen to e3 check instead of bishop to a6. And here, there's a critical moment for white. You must play the move rook f2. Now, this is very, I think, unintuitive for a human to play because you don't want to step into a pin, and it looks like black should capture down here. In fact, you need to move the bishop on b7 because capturing here is a mistake. Even though this looks super strong, white has queen to e2, which defends the rook that is pinned and also counters on the black queen so that you're going to be able to break the pin, and actually white is much better in the emerging positions. Unfortunately for white, white did not find this defense rook f2, and white played king h1, trying to get the king out of the way, tuck it away, say, I'm safer over here in the corner, but now the back rank is a problem, and the pawns are marching very soon. Black is basically winning from here out, but it takes excellent play. Bishop c8, bishop to d7, pawn to f2, looking for queen to e1, and you're very close to promoting if, of course, white's pieces get distracted. Rook to f1, pawn to d3, expanding and hitting the rook right here. Now, the last practical chance here, I think, is bishop takes c8, allowing black to capture here and then playing bishop to a6. In this position, black should win, but I still think that this is quite difficult. This pawn is hard to stop, And these pawns are actually well controlled. It is difficult to break the blockade and push the pawns through. So this would have been really resourceful. And the -2 that the computer is assigning to black in this position is not an easy -2 to convert. This would be very, very challenging still, I think. In the game, we actually get the move rook c3, but then bishop takes d7, pawn takes d7, and now e4. And these pawns are much, much stronger than this pawn right here. And we find here that the rooks are just not good at defending against pawns when they're trapped in front of advancing passed pawns. Triple advancing passed pawns. Queen c8, just bishop d8. Queen c4, queen to e1, threatening to take. And of course, you can't take. This is back rank checkmate. So rook c1, boom, d2. Hey, I have 2 pawns on the 7th rank. You can capture my queen. I'll recapture, and I'm basically going to force checkmate down here. Queen c5, threatening a little checkmate over here, but just rook g8. The rook doesn't need to be active anymore. Doesn't matter, because the queen and the pawns can do it all themselves. You just tuck the rook away and say, no worries. Rook d1, pawn to e3, queen c3. And in this position, there are many ways to win, but black finds the most precise, forcing checkmate and forcing the pawns through. Queen takes d1, very beautiful, so that after rook takes d1, there is e2. And this is the final position. White is up a queen for a bishop. White has his own totally blockaded pawn on the 7th rank, but these triple connected pawns on the 7th rank are just promoting. And when they promote, whichever one promotes, it's also going to be back rank checkmate. So this is maybe one of the most famous final positions. It is absolutely one of the most famous final positions in the game of chess. I hope that you've enjoyed this game. The game is really, really rich. It is by no means perfect, but the level of play and the ideas at play, I think, are just incredible, and it deserves to be considered the first true chess masterpiece. Now, this is my last video in this series of 135 of the best games from each decade in chess history. This series has been going on more than 2 years, well before the pandemic, and it's insane to finish it up right here. How is it my last video, though, when it's my number 3 best game from before 1900? Well, the answer is that my number 2 best game from before 1900 is the Immortal game, and my number 1 is the Opera game. I think those picks aren't too surprising. They're incredible games that I've loved for a long time for a reason. They're also games that I've already covered on this channel. So at the end of the video, there will be links to those videos that you can check out. And definitely, if you haven't seen it before, you're in for a treat. Now, this series has been just insane for me. For me, it's been an incredible way to look at chess history. I've been able to cover with fresh eyes some of the greatest games that I've known from a young age, and all kinds of new games that I hadn't seen before. And in some cases, I think basically no viewer of this channel had seen before. And that's just been super, super fun. I think a big question, of course, to anyone who's subscribed to this channel is, what am I going to do next? I have a lot of thoughts for content that I want to do that is going to allow me to be more creative and to challenge myself. And I also want to try some things out that I think could be really fun, popular content on YouTube that I've not done before and that I've not seen other people doing. And I'm going to be exploring that. I'm also going to be, I think, making some videos talking about things that I want to do and looking for opinions from people watching the channel. If you have liked any video in this series, then I do encourage you to subscribe to be in tune with what's coming up next. And if you've liked any video, leave a like on this video. The likes, the comments really do mean a lot. And I thank everyone who's been watching all of these games in this series. Thank you so much, and have an incredible day.